With all options back on the table now after President Biden's disastrous debate performance, many Democrat operatives are trying to come up with a solution to their new problem, which is whether or not President Biden should be the eventual nominee. The primary is still in full swing until they actually announce the nominee at their convention, which happens in a few short weeks. And so it's interesting to see what's being proposed. There was a really interesting exchange on television. Alan Lichtman was talking about what a disaster these new proposals would actually be. He's been around for a while and he had some things to say about this newly proposed idea of an open convention. Take a look.
Delegates could, in fact, decide to replace President Biden. But based on history, that would be a disaster to have a convention brawl. What do all of these politicians, political operatives, journalists, pundits have in common who are calling for Biden to leave the ticket? Zero track record in predicting elections. Remember, they all assured us Hillary Clinton was bound to win in 2016. I do have a system, the 13 keys to the White House, which has been right for 40 years, and it shows how disastrous it would be for the Democrats to have a big brawl and replace Biden. Biden checks off two of my 13 keys: incumbency and party contest. Remember, 87% of voters voted for Biden in the primaries. That means on my system, 6 of the remaining 11 keys would have to fall to predict his defeat. On the other hand, under this scenario, they lose incumbency, they lose party contest, only 4 more keys would have to fall. They would be setting up the same situation that led to the election of Donald Trump in the first place in 2016, an open seat with no incumbent running and a party contest. And you can go all the way back to 1900. And since that time, under those conditions, the party holding the White House has won 0 times. Whereas with an sitting president and no contest, they won 75% of the time. So all of this is being fueled by historical ignorance, not a real knowledge of how elections work.
So fascinating by Mr. Lichtman there. And there's an article over at Semaphore that kind of goes through this new idea. And I'm telling you, Morgan Chalfant has an excellent piece there. I would recommend that you read it. You can find all of our notes and articles and even our interviewees, people who join us on the program at stacyontheright.com. The show notes for every TV program are there. And so you might want to read this article because it outlines what some younger strategists, according to Mr. Lichtman, have said might be possible. Now, the idea goes something like this. You have this memo that was shared with Semaphore, and it's also been circulated to Democrat donors and bundlers, as well as officials within the Biden campaign administration. There are a few tacks to it. First, Biden would step down as the nominee mid-July. He would announce the new system, and Vice President Kamala Harris would back this new idea. There's your first thing that might not work. Kamala Harris would like to be the nominee herself. I'm not sure why she would agree to any kind of open primary system or support it. And her surrogates in the media have already come out and said that a huge part of the Democrat Party base, Black Democrats, would leave and not vote in this election in order to prevent this from happening. So you have potential candidates under this scheme having a few days to throw their respective hats in the ring. The Democrats would then begin a primary sprint with 6 candidates who received the most votes from delegates pledging to run positive-only campaigns in the month leading up to the convention. The Blitz primary would involve weekly forums with each candidate moderated by cultural icons, Michelle Obama, Oprah, and Taylor Swift, among some of the names floated, in order to engage voters. And then the nominee would ultimately be chosen by the delegates using ranked choice voting before the start of the Chicago convention, August 19th. I wrote about the demonization of our voting processes through ranked choice voting in my book. Terrible idea to institute that for any party at any national level, setting kind of a precedent for it to be used in later elections. We should absolutely not agree to anything like that. And then it would be announced with plenty of fanfare on the 3rd day of the Democrats' national convention. The memo imagines the nominee unveiled on a stage with President Biden, former President Obama, and former President Bill Clinton. Now, the country would be captivated, according to the authors of this new idea, and donations would pour in. It's interesting. I have no opinion on whether or not they should do it because I want to see their opposition win this election. So you have Sarah Isgur, senior editor at the Dispatch. She was talking about Biden's candidacy, and it adds a lot of context here. Watch this.
You know, you mentioned the difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I think compared to the Republican Party in 2016, particularly after the Access Hollywood tape, there was a lot of conversation among Republicans about replacing Donald Trump all the way to the highest levels of the RNC. Of course, it was after the convention at that point. Ask yourself whether Democrats would be having the same conversation today if Joe Biden were leading Donald Trump. It's the reason why Republicans aren't talking about replacing Donald Trump. He looks like he's going to win handily at this point from an electoral college standpoint. Could be one of the largest victories we've seen in a long time. So, yes, they want to run against Joe Biden at this moment, but they see Harris as vulnerable as well. It's a win-win right now for Republicans.
Yep. And that's the key thing that you have to think about in your calculus when people bring this up to you, when you maybe are, getting your fresh cup of coffee at work, if you're back in the office and someone says, wow, I think Biden should stay in or Biden should leave, whatever the opinion you hear about Biden's candidacy, you have to put it up against the rubric of what they're doing based on who they think will win. So it's not really about his efficacy. It's not about his popularity. It's not about his policies. It's not about anything other than will he beat Trump in November. The idea was they would launch 5 cases against Trump and at least one of them would stick and he'd land in jail and be disqualified from winning the election. They knew he was the presumptive nominee for the GOP and that he would be the one that voters would coalesce around. What they didn't take into consideration was the backlash, the enormous wave of fundraising that has been precipitated by these cases and the conviction in the New York hush money case, and more specifically, how this president has been able to leverage the attack on his own person, his ability to do business, leverage that against Americans' distaste for policies that have been implemented by the Biden administration. So there's a huge groundswell right now, but is it real? I tend to feel as if we're being treated to almost like a play of sorts that's being acted out for our benefit. The president of the United States, someone who was obviously suffering from some form of cognitive decline during the original campaign in 2019, actually being put forward as the nominee in this time space continuum for 2024's election cycle, and he's actually worse off than he was during the last campaign. And that idea, any pointing out of the numerous falls, slips, falling off of a bike, falling off of the stairs or Air Force One, different things that we have sympathy for, those things being called deep fakes, those things being told to us, don't believe your eyes. You didn't see that. You didn't hear him stumble over an answer. You didn't hear a word salad from him. You didn't see him wander off at the G7. All of those things are now being reversed. You're supposed to erase that from your mind that you were told you're crazy when you brought those things up as really serious concerns for his candidacy. And now they want to open a jungle primary process and bring a bunch of celebrities in, more acting, more playing out for your benefit. I think it's a travesty. Democrats need to wake up and become serious about talking to the American people in a way that respects our intelligence. And we'll have more for you on that here on Salem News Channel. Up next is Too Little Too Late, the consensus upon hearing the news of new deportation flights carrying illegals back to China. I'll have more for you right after this.